Today's readings are going to ask us to ask ourselves what we do, why do we do it, and do we allow God to be in the midst of all of those things? If I were to ask you, do you remember your first teaching assignment or your first ministry assignment? The first time you went out on ministry. Can you remember what that was? The very first day that you went out on ministry. Okay, some people say yes and some people no. So let me tell you about my first teaching assignment. I moved into the high school in San Antonio, my own high school that I went to. And the very first day, I was in my black pants, my white shirt, my black tie, and my black suit coat. And I was ready to save the world and to change the world, because I had been preparing myself all of those times. And I was excited. And I was ready for whatever challenge I could receive. And there was a brother who was the academic person, the academic vice principal, who said to me the first day, he said, well, remember that schedule we gave you? You're going to learn that in teaching you have to be ready to adjust. So we're going to change your schedule because someone wasn't going to be there. So I took, for the first hour and a half of the school day, pictures of students for the ID cards. That's all I did for an hour and a half. Took pictures. He came by at one point and he smiled and he said, I hope you're having fun. I said, okay. And there were about 25 in the community. Some brothers still working, some semi-retired. Then I learned that being a brother in ministry meant that you had to keep adjusting. So there's a very old brother in the house who was responsible for all the school buses, 40 students. He came, knocked on my door after I had been there a week, and he said to me, brother, are you ready to go for your test? And I said to him, what test would that be? And he said, well, you know, all the brothers carry a bus driver license. And so I went and I took my test, and I passed it. I still have that license to this day. And there was an old brother in the house who was a former teacher, a history teacher, like I am sometimes. And regular, he would ask me, how's it going? And I'd say, well, I'm teaching this. And then he'd say, well, try this, and try this, and try this. And I'd say, okay. And then a week or two later, he'd say, did you try those things? And I'd say, sometimes I would say, I tried it and it worked. And other times I'd say, I tried it and it didn't work. And then he would smile at me. And sometimes he would say, I tried it and it worked for me. And other times he said, I tried it and it never worked for me. And I remember saying to him, Ralph, why would you tell me things that didn't work for you? And then that's when he got serious, one of the few times he was serious. And he said to me, teaching is about knowing that it's not anything about you. Because he said, sometimes you're going to think that it's only about you and how good you are and how you set things up. He said, teaching needs to be about your preparation, your prayer, and understanding that you have to change based on the students that are before you that day. But it's not about how good you are, but it's about the ministry. To me, that tells us what today is all about. Because that first reading says to us that it's not about what we do, that it's about being in the presence of God. That it's God that is about everything. And that we have to remember to be centered on God, and that it's not what the world tells us. Because the world tells us that it's about me. And I think that's what that brother was telling me. It's not about you. It's about God and the mystery and the beauty of teaching. I grew up speaking both English and Spanish. My sisters will tell you that I don't know how to speak either of them very well. So let me try out the Spanish speakers and ask an expression Have you ever heard, down in Texas, we use an expression that says, que Dios por delante. Is that a common expression in the Spanish-speaking world? Yes, no? Yes? And what does that expression mean, Dios por delante? Anybody want to try?
God is the first one.
God is the first one. And the way I learned it was that in the midst of everything, that our responsibility was to put God first. At least that's the way my mom taught it to me, was that God needs to go first. Brothers, I think as we continue through the general chapter, we have to remember what it is that we're about. Our call to be Marianists, a call to have a great love for the Society of Mary, and that all of this is done because we want to put God first in our lives, in our ministries, in our provinces and our regions, and most importantly, in our hearts. And as they simply say, que Dios por delante.